She spent her last $34 on me. I had $43 million and never told her. The elevator doors opened on the 31st floor at 9:14 in the morning, and Hazel Hernandez stepped out wearing her second-hand coat buttoned to her chin, her sneakers worn through at the left toe, and 4 days of silence behind her eyes. She told herself she wasn't nervous, she was furious. The woman at the front desk looked up with the kind of smile that cost companies money to train. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Theodore Colton." A pause, the kind that lasts long enough to mean something. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Hazel said, "but he'll see me." She was right, he did. But you need to understand how they got here. Because it started the way most things that change your life do, with a cold cup of coffee and a one-eyed rabbit named Clover. The rabbit was missing her left eye and had a seam running along one ear that Theodore had re-stitched 3 separate times, once at 1:47 in the morning, once on a delayed flight to Portland, once sitting on the floor of a hospital waiting room in November with a paper cup of vending machine coffee going cold beside him. Clover went everywhere with Matilda. She was 7 years old, had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn jaw, and every Sunday morning she arranged Clover, her 3 plastic dinosaurs, and her collection of 9 smooth river stones in a precise order on the kitchen table before she would allow herself to eat. "You moved the Triceratops," she told Theodore on the Sunday that changed everything. "I did not move the Triceratops. She's facing the wrong direction. She needs to see the window." Matilda rotated the figure exactly 22 degrees there. Theodore refilled his mug and stood watching his daughter with the mix of exhaustion and gratitude that had become the permanent background condition of his life. The apartment was intentionally small. A 2-bedroom in the north end, with a water stain above the refrigerator and pipes that clanged when the temperature dropped. His real address, the one on his tax documents, was a 4,000-square-foot townhouse in Beacon Hill. But he hadn't slept there in 18 months. That was when he'd started the experiment. His ex-wife Claire had not been a cruel person. She had been a direct one, and when she left, she was honest about it. She had fallen in love with someone else, someone with $190 million in real estate, and a life that matched the one she'd wanted. She didn't say it was about money. She didn't need to. The pattern was legible enough for anyone willing to read it. So Theodore had started testing. He rented the apartment. He drove a 2009 Honda Civic with 117,000 miles on it. He wore jackets from the second-hand rack on Cambridge Street and memorized the expression a person makes when their card gets declined. Embarrassed but survivable, not catastrophic. He dated 25 women over 18 months, and he watched each time as the warmth in their eyes shifted around the 3rd or 4th week. When the car had trouble starting, when dinner got awkward, when the math of what he could offer didn't balance with what they'd been hoping for. Some were gracious about it, some were not. He was running out of reasons to keep going. Then on a Tuesday in February, at 6:47 in the evening, he walked into a diner on Hanover Street called Rosario's, because it was 19 degrees outside and he'd been walking for an hour and needed somewhere to sit. He ordered coffee he didn't need. He chose a table near the window. He was not looking for anything in particular. The waitress brought the coffee without looking up from her order pad. "Cream? Black is fine, thanks." She wrote something down. Her name tag read Hazel. She was somewhere in her late 20s, with the kind of tiredness behind her eyes that isn't built in a night but brick by brick across a long stretch of time. Her sneakers were clean but worn at the toe. She moved between the 6 tables in her section with an economy of motion that took a few minutes to recognize as skill. No wasted step, no unnecessary detour, every gesture purposeful. He noticed her because of the old man in the corner booth. Mr. Callahan. Theodore didn't know his name yet, but Hazel used it twice in 3 minutes, naturally, not performing warmth but actually expressing it. When the man's hands shook too badly to open the creamer cups, she opened 3 of them without comment and set them beside his saucer. She didn't make a moment of it. She was already moving toward the next ticket. Theodore sat at his table for 53 minutes and drank coffee he didn't taste. He came back the following Tuesday, and the one after that. By the 4th visit, he had learned that she worked a double shift beginning at 6 a.m. that her brother Carlos was 16 and had been ill since he was 12 with a kidney condition that required specialist care and medications, that insurance covered only partially, and that she used the cash from her tip jar to buy the biology and algebra textbooks Carlos's school district didn't fund. She mentioned all of this the way people do when they've made peace with their circumstances, not bitterly, not seeking anything in return, just as plain fact. He asked her to coffee on a Thursday, a place 3 blocks from the diner because she had 40 minutes before her second job at a dry cleaner on Hanover Street. She arrived on time and ordered nothing, because, she told him plainly, she'd already spent her tip budget for the week. He insisted on paying, and she let him with one nod that had no calculation in it. She was direct, no performance, no angle. Her parents had died on I-93 when she was 22. She had become Carlos's legal guardian by default, by necessity, and she did not frame this as sacrifice. She framed it as a fact that came with her like a last name. She worked 68 hours most weeks. She hadn't taken a full day off in 3 years. "What about you?" she asked. He told her he worked in tech support. She nodded once, completely satisfied with this answer, and moved on. She did not ask what company. She did not ask where he lived or what he drove. She seemed genuinely interested in whether he found the work interesting, and when he said sometimes, she said she understood that some tables were interesting, most were not. But you came back anyway. He drove home that night to his rental apartment in the North End and sat at the kitchen table for a long time, not thinking about the quarterly reports waiting in his actual email inbox. There is a concept in behavioral science sometimes called the unscripted moment. It refers to the small instances, the delayed elevator, the wrong order, the creamer cups a man's hands can't open, when a person's response reveals something that their self-presentation layer cannot control. People spend significant energy curating what they say about themselves. What they do not always curate is what they do when they believe the stakes are low, when no one is measuring, when the only reward for doing the right thing is having done it. Theodore had designed his test precisely to catch these moments. The card declining, the walk in November wind, the car that wouldn't start. He believed he was a careful observer. He had not considered that Hazel was observing too. That people who survive hard things develop their own radar, not for money, not for status, but for whether someone is going to stay. He was, without knowing it, failing her test at the same time she was passing his. The dinner came on their third meeting. He let the card decline with the practiced expression, embarrassed but not destroyed. He reached for his jacket to check for cash he wasn't carrying. Hazel opened her wallet. She put down $34 in bills, which he estimated later represented close to 2 hours of tip money. She did not narrate the gesture. She did not expect him to feel a particular way about it. She flagged the waitress, settled the check, and resumed telling him about the time Carlos, at 13, had drawn an elaborate floor plan of the hospital ward from memory, because he had nothing else to do for 4 days and wanted to understand the space he was living in. Theodore said nothing. He drove home and put the $34 in an envelope and kept it in the desk drawer of his Beacon Hill townhouse. He didn't know why, he just knew it shouldn't be spent. The second test was a walk in November. The third came when he brought Matilda. He told himself it was practical. Matilda was part of his life. They would have to meet eventually. He told himself this was not a test. It was, of course, still a test. They met at Matilda's school winter recital. Hazel arrived with Carlos, who was taller than Theodore expected and moved with the deliberate care of someone who has learned their body doesn't always cooperate. He shook hands with Theodore with more formality than most adults managed. Matilda looked at Hazel for 7 full seconds and then held out Clover. This was not something she did. Theodore could count on one hand the number of people Matilda had allowed to hold Clover. He watched Hazel accept the rabbit with both hands, the way you receive something that matters to someone else. Not casually, not performing delight, but with actual seriousness. "She seems very important," Hazel said. "She's my best friend," Matilda said. "Then I'll hold her carefully." After the recital, Matilda played her 2-measure piano piece with the expression of a surgeon completing a difficult procedure. Hazel took the 4 of them to a soft-serve place on Salem Street. She paid for Carlos's cone without discussion. She asked Matilda about sprinkles 3 separate times before ordering because Matilda had changed her answer twice. When the cone began to drip, Hazel had a napkin ready before Theodore had registered the problem. He sat across from her in a booth with his daughter on one side and a boy he didn't know on the other, and felt with unsettling clarity that what he was doing was no longer a test. It had become something he was going to have to reckon with. He told himself he would tell her next week. Then next week became the week after. He rehearsed the conversation in his head during board meetings, during school pickups. At 1:30 in the morning, when he couldn't sleep and lay staring at the water stain above the refrigerator and tried to remember exactly what he had been trying to prove and why it had seemed worth doing. Carlos said nothing about any of this and appeared to notice everything. One evening in March, while Hazel was in the kitchen, Carlos looked up from a statistics problem he had been walking Theodore through and said, "Can I tell you something?" "Sure." My sister used to laugh like she was apologizing for it. He tapped his pen against the textbook, like she had to get it done before something bad happened. She doesn't do that anymore. He looked back at the page. "I'm just putting that out there." Theodore said, "That's good." Carlos said, "Yeah, he underlined something, it is." There was a Saturday in March when Carlos had a stable week. The specialist had used the word cautiously optimistic, which is the best kind of optimistic in those circumstances. And the 4 of them were in the park near the public garden, and Hazel sat on the bench beside Theodore and tilted her face toward the sun with her eyes closed and said nothing for 3 full minutes. He kissed her at 4:17 in the parking lot of a grocery store on the way home. She kissed him back. It lasted somewhere between 8 and 10 seconds and made the rest of the experiment feel very far away. "I have to tell you something," he said when it was over. "Not today," she said. She was looking at his jacket collar rather than his eyes, the way people do when they're deciding something. He agreed not today. He kept agreeing. He chose the public garden on a Sunday morning in April because it was the first warm day of the year, and because he understood dimly that he needed to do this in a place that was not his apartment, a place where the facts could just be facts and not feel like they were inside something that had been built on them. He told her everything. He laid it out in order, beginning with the divorce, moving through the experiment, arriving at the first Tuesday at Rosario's. He told her about the apartment in the North End, the Civic, the card, the jacket. He told her that the $34 she had paid from her tip money was in an envelope in a drawer of a townhouse in Beacon Hill that he owned outright and had not been sleeping in for 18 months. He told her that he had $43 million and had spent the last 18 months pretending that he didn't. She didn't say anything for a long time. The ducks in the garden stood in their bronze configurations, permanent and indifferent. "You tested me," she said finally. "I was trying to. While Carlos was waiting 3 months for a medication approval. While I was covering Saturday shifts at the dry cleaners so I could make the co-pays." Her voice was level, not shaking. The steadiness of it was worse than anything else she might have done. "You were evaluating me." "That is not the word I would." "That is exactly what it was." She stood from the bench. "I need you not to follow me right now." He didn't follow her. He sat in the public garden for 22 minutes. The ducks looked exactly as they always had. She didn't answer his calls for 4 days. On the second evening, Matilda was moving the Triceratops in slow circles around the table, and she said, without looking up, "Is Hazel coming on Saturday?" "I don't know, Matt." She stopped rotating the figure. She set it down facing the window. She didn't ask again, and somehow that was worse. Theodore went to the real office, the 31st floor. His assistant looked at him with barely concealed surprise. He sat in the glass conference room and answered emails and did the work that needed to be done, and thought with each passing hour that he had a very precise understanding of what it felt like to have built something and then understand, too late, what you'd been careless with. On the 4th day at 9:14 in the morning, the front desk called upstairs. She stood in the center of his office with the harbor spread out behind her through the floor-to-ceiling glass, took in the room without performing any reaction to it, and said, "I thought about this for 4 days. I know, I'm still angry, I know." She walked to the window. Below, the harbor was iron gray and still. You could have kept lying to me. You were good at it. I had no idea." She paused on that last sentence, turning it over. That part took the longest to work through. "That you were good enough at it that I couldn't tell." He said nothing. "But then I thought you stopped." She turned around. Her eyes were dry and direct. "You didn't have to. There was no reason I would have ever known. You chose to tell me at the worst possible moment for yourself." She said it like an accountant reading a balance sheet. "Not forgiveness inventory. That matters." "It should never have started," he said. "No, it shouldn't have." A silence. "But I don't have a habit of throwing away things that matter because of how badly they began." She looked at him steadily. "I have conditions. Tell me." She named 3. No tests, no versions, no performed poverty, strategic silences, no manufactured situations to evaluate her without her knowledge. If he ever doubted her, he would say so with words, not a declined card. He agreed to all 3 without hesitation. She nodded once. "I'm still angry. That might take a while." "Okay. It won't be the same as before," she said. "It'll be something else. It might be better." "I don't know yet. Neither do I." "That's honest." She picked up her coat from the chair where she'd set it. "The $34. Donate it somewhere. I don't want it back." He donated it that afternoon to Mass General's Pediatric Nephrology Department. Then he set up a research grant in Carlos's name for $175,000. He told no one. He didn't tell Hazel, didn't tell Matilda, filed the paperwork through his foundation's general giving account, and considered the matter private. 3 weeks later, Carlos's specialist mentioned it during a routine appointment, with some ceremony. Hazel called that evening. He answered on the first ring. "The grant," she said. You did that. It needed doing." A silence on the line, long enough that he checked twice to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then she said, "Okay." It was, he understood, the closest thing to a second beginning that they were going to get. 6 months later, on a Sunday morning in October, Matilda arranged Clover and the 3 dinosaurs and the 9 smooth river stones on the kitchen table of a different apartment. Not the rental in the North End, not the Beacon Hill townhouse. A place in the South End, 2 blocks from a grocery store Hazel liked, and 4 blocks from a park where Carlos, whose numbers had improved steadily since spring, liked to sit with his biology textbook in the afternoon when the sun came through the trees at a particular angle. Carlos arrived at 10 a.m. with breakfast burritos from a place on Washington Street. He claimed the food was better than whatever Theodore had been planning to make. He was correct. Theodore made coffee. This time he actually intended to drink it. Hazel sat across from Matilda and, without being asked, opened the 2 creamer cups that Matilda could never quite manage herself. She set them beside the mug without comment and picked up her own coffee. Matilda stared at her. "You remembered," she said. "I remember things about people I like," Hazel said. Matilda thought about this the way she thought about things that mattered, seriously, with the triceratops in her hand. Then she turned the figure to face the window. "Hazel can have the window side today," she told the dinosaur. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. Theodore set down 4 mugs, 1 with 3 sugars and a significant amount of milk, because Carlos had opinions about coffee that he expressed without apology, and stood in his kitchen listening to the noise of his apartment fill with something it had been missing for longer than 18 months. Not performance, not test, not the careful management of what anyone could see. Just people being imperfectly and genuinely themselves. They still argued about money and what it signified, about where the line was between helping and overreaching, about whether Carlos's specialist appointments needed to be a group event or whether that was too much. They argued the way people do when the thing they're arguing about is something that belongs to both of them, with some heat, some weariness, and the underlying understanding that arguing means you haven't given up. Nothing was tested, everything was real. That, in the end, was the only thing that mattered. Personal reflection. I keep coming back to the $34. Not the moment in the park when the truth came out, or the moment Hazel walked into his office with her coat buttoned and her jaw set. Those moments were dramatic and necessary. But the $34 in the envelope in the drawer, that's the detail that stayed with me. He could have forgotten it. Most people would have. But he kept it, which means he knew, on some level, that what she'd done was worth something that couldn't be spent. We talk a great deal about red flags, the things that warn us away from someone. But I think we talk less about the quieter signals, the creamer cups, the napkin ready before the drip, the way someone holds something that belongs to a child. I wonder sometimes whether the people in my own life who I've judged by the wrong things, by how they looked or what they drove or what they couldn't afford, were running their own quiet experiments, and whether I passed. Have you ever been tested without knowing it? Or tested someone else and convinced yourself it wasn't what it was? I'd genuinely like to hear about it in the comments. This story is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, and events are products of imagination. Any resemblance to real persons or events is coincidental. The story is intended for entertainment and reflection.